Without further ado, we got lots more show clips tonight, and we will find the Candace Tate quote that I was looking for. First, I got to let you in on a little secret. Did you know that Ukraine invaded Russia this week with U.S. support?
Yeah,
right.
So crazy.
There's so many crazy things going on out there. That's a major move.
Yeah.
I would not have, on my bingo card, I did not have Ukraine invading Russia. But if they were going to, you bet your ass they got Uncle Sam supporting them, right? Because there's no way Zelensky's like taking action against Putin without some NATO backing. And we'll get to like the origins of NATO maybe tonight, because after this clip from Breaking Points, we have War enforcing the New World Order. It's a speech by Dr. Robert Malone, creator of the mRNA technology, former contractor, maybe possibly current contractor for the Department of Defense. He is one of the guys that worked with DARPA and create the whole thing to license it later to Moderna as what became later the gene therapy that they offered to everybody in a mandatory way. He now is becoming the least little bit educated, but he is aware and he's out there public speaking on what he knows at this point. And I'd be interested in having a longer conversation at some point. But Robert Malone, in his speech at the Mises Caucus Forum, I don't know where they're at, maybe down in Alabama. Mises Media is publishing this. It's very refreshing for someone of his renown and stature and platform, again, to be understanding things that have been known to people who listen to my work for the past 20 years. Like, this is not going to be a surprise. What's a surprise is who's the audience and who's the guy presenting it, because these are not usually in the conversation. That Mises audience steers clear of anything outside the narrative. And heretofore, if there wasn't a pandemic and that guy showed up to say that story, they would have all just like booed him and hissed him and kicked him out of the room. They wouldn't tolerate it. But because it's Robert Malone and because of what he's been through and because of what the people in the audience have now been through because of the pandemic, all of a sudden people are ready to be red pilled. It's like an overnight success that took 20 years. Here we go. Here's Dr. Robert Malone, and he's going to follow Breaking Points, telling us how Ukraine invades Russia.
We have a crazy situation right now in Ukraine. Media that barely even wants to report it. The United States is currently backing a full-blown invasion of Russia. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. This is from the Institute for the Study of War. Of course, you want to color in and keep in mind their own bias, but this is basically the best data that we have. Russian forces have been pushed back some 30 square kilometers or so inside of their own territory. And again, this is internationally recognized Russian territory, not territory that they have previously claimed in the Kursk region of Russia. According to Russian officials, some 100,000 Russian citizens have had to flee the area. There are approximately 1 million who are there. There are several towns that have been taken over by the Ukrainians in a so-called shock offensive. Now, the reason why it's a shock is that according to the Ukrainians and to the U.S. narrative, this is supposed to be a war of defense from invasion. So to counter their invasion, Crystal, they have decided to invade territory which they deem Russian. Now, philosophically, I don't really have a problem with this. Of course, whenever you're in a war, you should be doing whatever you need to. The issue is not what the Ukrainians are doing. It's the fact that U.S. NATO weaponry is being employed to literally invade Russia. Yeah. And when we flip it around and we consider what it would look like here, this is not disputed territory. This is internationally recognized an invasion. And that is literally the justification for every dollar of the hundreds of billions that we have shipped to Ukraine is to defend against this invasion. And then just consider, can any great power nation sit there and tolerate an invasion of its own territory? If Mexico invaded even up until the city of Laredo or El Paso, would we tolerate that? No, we would bomb them back to the Stone Age, as the sayings go. Now, let's be fair, too. This has also demonstrated the tremendous problems with the Russian military that they haven't been able to immediately push this back. Put this up there, for example, on the screen. The Financial Times reports Russian reinforcements have failed to push back the Ukrainian incursion. The 6th day, President Zelensky has openly acknowledged taking the war to Russian territory. And there is no doubt, Crystal, that this is 100% with the backing of the United States of America. And given Joe Biden's decline that we just talked about at length, is he even in charge here? And as Americans, can we sit here and risk a literal invasion of Russia at the same time that we have billions of dollars in military assets steaming towards the Middle East, and with the Israelis openly saying Iran is going to attack us and the United States is going to have to once again spend billions to defend Israel from that attack? Can we really tolerate the risk of these two? And the fact that they probably contribute. The Iranians say, hey, we got a lot of military assets tied up over there, and the Russians are saying got a lot of military assets tied up over there.
That's very true. Yeah. And meanwhile, you know, the media has basically lost interest in this story.
No,
There's
they don't
very
care.
little coverage of it. You know, JD Vance and all of his many interviews he did yesterday, there was not, I think, one question about.
He brought it up once in a print interview, but yes, to any of the media people, they didn't bring it up.
They didn't bring it up.
Yeah.
Like, what could be more important than we're backing the invasion of a nuclear-armed superpower? And hey, how's this going to end? Where is this leading? What's your plan? You know, if you were in the White House, what would your side of the equation be? And there's zero interest in it. You know, people have lost interest in this story because it is a lot messier than it was in the early days when it was just like, go Ukraine, and Ukraine had Russia on the back foot. Now you're in this long grinding war of attrition, and make no doubt about it, the fact that the Biden administration finally caved and sent those F-16 fighter jets, that is a big part of the reason why they were able to make these gains. You'll recall, early on in this war, Biden was very resistant. He was very careful about what he sent. There was a lot of concern about potential escalation. There was, I mean, the idea in the beginning that you would send F-16 fighter jets to enable Ukrainian invasion of Russia would have been considered insane. And yet here we are, and no one's even talking about it, which is even more insane, quite frankly.
Well, we have that. So let's go and put, please, D4 up on the screen. In terms of the F-16s, they began to arrive. Now, actually, what's even more troubling is not only the F-16s and the way that they've gotten their hands on that, it's that all of the precision-guided munitions are very, very difficult to manufacture here in the U.S. We have very limited stocks of them. And of course, what has the Biden administration done? They've decided to greenlight shipping those precision-guided munitions for the F-16 back to Ukraine. And so they're going to be using like precision-guided weaponry from U.S. stockpiles, which are difficult to manufacture when we're in the middle of two global conflagrations, which possibly, and very, you know, I wouldn't say likely, but possibly, that the U.S. forces could get themselves into. We also literally have Zelensky openly acknowledging this. D3, please. Where for days, and usually when the Ukrainians pull some terrorist attack or whatever in Russia, they're like, oh, what a tragedy. You know, it's crazy that somebody would do that. They're just openly saying it. In his video address that was late on Saturday, he said Ukrainian military is pushing the war onto the aggressor territory. Now, again, I want to say philosophically, I don't care about this. It is normal, actually, to try and hit your enemy wherever they are and to throw them off balance. But when it's America's role, and we're the ones who are funding all of this, and we are the ones who experience any potential blowback, then that's a real issue. We also, you know, shockingly enough, yes, it's true the Ukrainians can pull this off. And then this morning in the Wall Street Journal, they talk about how the Ukrainian commander is begging for more troops. They have no idea what to do. They've had 6 days worth of success. And now they're like, do we hold this territory? What do we do with this territory? Now we have to pull stuff away from previous defensive fronts over here. Their own military leadership has no idea what to do with these gains. So yeah, it's been a good PR stunt. Can you hold it? You know, are you now going to annex it into Ukraine? Are you going to, I mean, imagine the hypocrisy and the sheer insanity of bargaining, you know, and claiming that your territory needs to be given back to you, but then occupying internationally recognized territory and swapping it. Now that's a very different moral narrative, isn't it? Than saying, well, we're just fighting back against the people who have invaded our country.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, you know, is that the longer this drags on, there's the moral ambiguity increases, the so-called justness of their cause decreases, their overall like ability to even stand this without literally tens of billions of dollars a month having to flow there in Western aid. It shows us that this cannot go on forever. And we all know how it's going to end. And so they refuse to end it. Currently, we refuse, frankly, to responsibly end it. And we bear the ultimate risk for any.
I was asked, and I'm very grateful for the invitation to come here. I've been aware of the Mises Institute kind of at the periphery of my consciousness. Never imagined that I would be asked to interact with you folks or have the privilege of being here, for which I'm grateful. in trying to, and I travel all the time, I talk all the time. Most of those talks are easy to give, but this was different. This is talking to an audience, a younger audience that's becoming expert in a domain that I am absolutely a neophyte in. I'm just starting to learn about the underpinnings of the logic of Rothbard, Mises, and economics in general. I never took an economics course during my undergraduate or graduate training. I was too busy in the world of molecular this and that. And now I find that in my journey to try to comprehend what transpired during the COVID crisis, that economics is the center of it all. Now I find that economics is what's driving politics. Now I find that it's the markets, it's Mr. Market, that is defining the new world order. It's defining what political reality is. It's defining what is acceptable, the acceptable range of politics. Essentially the Overton window, if you're familiar with that. Politics is being defined economically. And clearly, I need to come up to speed. So this lecture gave me an opportunity to try to start to think through the kind of simplistic understanding that I had about libertarianism coming from my experience when I was about your age, burning through all the Ayn Rand books. And by the way, hence the origin of the name of our Substack, who is Robert Malone, is a nod to who's John Galt, in case you didn't figure that out. So as I started to try to process what we discuss in the book and the experiences and journey that Dr. Joel Glasspool Malone and myself have had through the COVID crisis, and all of my colleagues, so many people that have contributed to we could call it the resistance. It seems a little grandiose. This kind of burgeoning movement of advocates for personal rights, medical freedom, and freedom in general. I tried to think hard about libertarianism, Rothbard's wisdom, and what I'm observing in the real world marketplace that I live in. One that is very much influenced by psychological warfare. And I'm deeply troubled by what I'm encountering, and I hope to learn and explore, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit before the hour's out, the kind of the limits of pure libertarian thought as they interface with this new world of fifth generation warfare and psychological warfare. I find that domain extremely troubling because the underpinning logic in Rothbard's analysis, in libertarianism in general, has to do with the free will, sovereignty, and autonomy of the individual. And with this technology, those concepts become obsolete to a significant extent. Now, I'm a little fearful because I've been living in this world for 4 years now, and you haven't. And so maybe you have, but maybe not obsessing about it the way that I have. And so I don't want to leave you behind. So when I say things, if they don't make sense, please ask. Okay? It's okay. I love questions. It's okay to interrupt me. Robert, I don't understand that. Can you elaborate? Can you clarify? Define that term. Doesn't make sense to me. I used to be an academic. I can handle it. Okay? So when I say things, and perhaps I might be assuming that I'm being clear to you, and you're not following it, I want to know that. I want that feedback, because it's super important to me that I communicate effectively with you. That's the whole reason why I'm here. Now I'm going to start with a quote from George Bernard Shaw, famous playwright. All censorships exist to prevent anyone from challenging current conceptions and existing institutions. All progress is initiated by challenging current conceptions and executed by supplanting existing institutions. Consequently, the first condition of progress is the removal of censorship. Simple stuff. I could imagine Rothbard writing that. The title of the book, the title of the topic, Psywar, Enforcing the New World Order, involves the interface between this modern technology of advanced psychological manipulation technology capabilities, science, and this push towards globalism, or I like to point out, it's functionally globalized corporatism. And I repeatedly make the point that Benito Mussolini defined fascism as corporatism. Okay? The term fascism has been twisted and bastardized by modern media to mean something which is different from its original intent. For me, I believe that with all of these political terms and sociologic terms, we have to go back to ground and make sure we have common language and communication. And as far as I'm concerned, fascism and corporatism are one and the same, and we now are moving into a space in which globalized corporatism is becoming the norm. It is the accepted vision for a large fraction of global leadership, including the United Nations, World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, etc., for the new model for the world order. So when I say Psywar, enforcing the new world order, what I'm talking about is the interface between this technology of psychological manipulation of populations at mass scale and the politics and economics of this globalist push that we're in the middle of right now, that Klaus Schwab refers to as the Great Reset. It was actually first referred to as the Great Reset by the current King of England. Okay? This is a trend which, as I look out on this sea of young faces, I'm sorry to say it's going to dominate a lot of your reality as you get to be an old fart like me. My expertise in this topic derives from 4 years of exposure to the technology and daily efforts over that period to try to understand what I was experiencing and frame those experiences within a broader context. I'm a physician and a scientist. I was trained as a scientist. I was trained to think as a scientist along the lines of methods of multiple working hypotheses. I don't have a hypothesis. I try to generate a swarm of explanations and then discern which of those are true. That's how I approach the world. And I brought those skills and experience and training into this domain of trying to comprehend what was deployed against me. Deployed against me by media. I could cite multiple examples, they're in the book. By the government. By a variety of different forces. It's not personal. It's not that I'm so important. It just happened that the collusion of experience, time, my background, etc., put me in the crosshairs of this juggernaut technology that's now being deployed globally against many, many people, not just myself. In terms of the broad outline of this discussion, I want to start by exploring the use of psychological warfare and fifth-generation warfare technologies during the COVID crisis. So I'm talking about the last 4 years. And we could say since the fall of 2019. Then I'll proceed to psychological bioterrorism, emphasizing the COVID-19 crisis and avian influenza. We are currently living in yet another round of psychological bioterrorism that's being deployed on us, in case you didn't figure that out. Then I'll discuss this term that really troubles me. Surveillance capitalism. It's surveillance capitalism, the interface of surveillance capitalism and the theories that underpin the Mises-Rothbard logic that is really troubling me. And conclude with some personal comments regarding globalism and my opinion about globalism that I hope might help you. Let's start with first principles. In The Anatomy of the State, Rothbard argues there are two means for producing wealth. You guys all know this. You've been taking this course. Economic means refers to producing and exchanging goods and services through voluntary human effort, creativity, and entrepreneurship. Economic means are additive, generating wealth for all parties involved. It is a voluntary transaction that Rothbard builds his, step-by-step, brick-by-brick logic that underpins everything that we're talking about here, the whole frame of reference for the world. It's what I love about Rothbard. He goes back to ground zero and builds the house, from the foundation up. But it all presumes free will. It presumes a system in which both parties engaging in an economic transaction are doing so through exercise of their own free will. Political means, the other means of acquiring wealth, and I really appreciated this little bumper sticker, inflation is theft, right? Political means refers to using force or coercion to seize wealth from others. Political means are reductive, distorting incentives and undermining long-term prosperity. For example, taxation is a form of theft in which political means are used to seize wealth from others. I assert that surveillance capitalism meets the criteria of a political means of theft, in which accumulated personal wealth in the form of fundamental, personal, and proprietary aspects of your soul are forcefully extracted without your permission and commodified without your permission. Surveillance capitalism is the business model that drives revenue for Amazon, Google, and Facebook, and so many other of the new tech industry, okay? And it's based on extraction of value without your permission from you. You follow what I'm saying? This has also pursued this business model, which I don't think Rothbard it's not covered. I hope that some of you someday might illuminate this space and give us the intellectual underpinnings to understand and bring the logic, to the extent it exists, of surveillance capitalism into the frame of reference of libertarianism. Right now, it doesn't exist. This is also the business model pursued by the entire mercenary censorship industrial complex, the fact-checker industry, and a wide range of non-governmental cutout organizations which act on behalf of a variety of governmental, NGO, and corporate organizations. Okay? These all function, they generate profit by extracting value without your permission from the very essence of who you are, what you say, what you think, what you feel. That is what's extracted from you, reformulated, packaged as a product, and then typically repeatedly sold as basically futures, a commodified future based on essential characteristics of who you are and what you think and believe and feel, what your motivations are. Okay? That is the essence of the modern social media, internet industry. In a sense, corporate media also practice a form of surveillance capitalism in which they engage in slander and defamation to advance political objectives and perspectives by intentionally and maliciously damaging reputations. Think about it. Okay? Corporate media generates profit by basically taking from you, if you become their target, and you can watch it playing out right now in real time in the presidential election. Look at what's being deployed against the new vice president candidate. Okay? What was deployed against Nicole Shanahan when it was announced that she was going to run as Bobby Kennedy's VP. Okay? They extract aspects of your soul, reformulate them, and weaponize them as slander and defamation, and generate profit in doing so. It is their core business model. Okay? They train journalists, they call it advocacy journalism, which is really training them to be propagandists, in how to do this process while avoiding the risks of lawsuits. They're actively trained to do this at CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, et cetera, et cetera. This business model extends all the way down to social media trolls who build audiences, clicks, and followers by publishing salacious and unfounded rumors, speculation, and accusations. Followers, clicks, likes, and trollery can be directly converted into revenue. But they are doing so by extracting value without your permission. Your reputational value is being pulled out, weaponized, reformulated, and used for purposes of advancing economic interests of third parties without your permission.
Go ahead and pull it. Without your permission. What's that mean? Well, that's a long talk. It's about an hour long. I advise, if you're interested, check out Robert Malone on Mises Media YouTube page. The overall gist: if we don't do something now, they're going to have technological and pharmaceutical means to override our free will, and it'll become a non sequitur, non-starter, non-connector. Like, it won't matter. It'll become irrelevant. So we have limited time. A clock is ticking. We learn to use our aptitude and we step up. What's our choice if we don't? They're going to erode and delete people's free will. What does that mean? That's like a big fancy phrase for saying what? They're going to put you in fucking prison. They're bringing prison to wherever you are by taking away your free will, by having technology, robots, algorithms, etc., cyborgs that are going to be like the protection layer between their Elysium ruling class and they, them, those who are like us. We're going to be the subjugated people. Our families, our communities, our businesses being colonized by international communism that has been warned and warned and warned and warned about by credible sources. But you've never heard about that because your school system lied to you because it was made by the people doing this. And your media system that you trust, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, Fox, whatever, is run by these people that are doing these things. So it's kind of like a big deal. Now, back in 1961, Aldous Huxley did the Berkeley speech, and it was about ending your free will. You know, you'll be subjugated and you'll love it. It's kind of like eating the bugs and having nothing and loving it. It's the same thing. It's just like they're further along with the plan because they were serious. They were funded. They kept having meetings, and you kept taking conspiracy theory as like a real thing. Like, there's no one out there. It's just incompetent people that are doing all these accidental things to increasingly erode your freedom forever on this planet. Okay. But at some point you probably have to figure out, just like Robert Malone did, like, welcome to like the big kids party, bro, because you're very good in your area, but also like those people at Mises, nobody's stopping you. They all understand what you're talking about. Like, you're the newbie at the table in that aspect. Now, if we had to get up on mRNA technology and working at DARPA and DOD, like, you would be the senior person at the table and we would all sit and listen to you. But in this aspect, I would like to help out because someone like Robert Malone showing this interest in this specific area is very interesting, and there are substantial answers to all these things that he's pointing out. And you know, I'd like to save him like 10 years or 15 years on the learning curve, and I'm going to play for you, the audience, something that illustrates something like it's been going on a long time, and it is still going on now, and it was going on then, and no one did anything about it then, so it's still going on now. At some point, people are going to be like, we have to do something about this. And when you find out who one of the characters is in this next video, this is an interview from 1983. It was a televised interview, And the title of it is "This Interview Ended His Life." It did. Maybe because of what he said and who he represented and what they were figuring out, and et cetera, et cetera. Maybe it added a cooling effect to those realizations or publications back in the nascent 1980s when people didn't have much freedom of the press. They had to read what New York Times and Wall Street Journal and Washington Post told them because people didn't have the internet back then. But now we have 2020 hindsight, and we can look back and we can see and compare, and we can actually see who were the controllers in this situation and who's the innocent person sitting in the middle who probably just outed himself to the people who would benefit from his death in the silence on this topic. So let's go to a very rare interview with Democratic Congressman from Georgia, 6th District. His name is Larry McDonald.
Now, wait a minute. There is an elite core in this country that has dominated American society. Well, their objective is to try to bring about a gradual transition in our society, a dissolving of sovereignty, and a moving steadily to the left on the political spectrum.
Well, who are they?
The elitist groups that I mentioned, particularly key individuals and policymakers in the Council
Is the International Monetary Fund part of it?
The interview you're about to watch is a perfect example of what happens when a politician steps out of line. Larry McDonald was a U.S. politician who served as a Democratic member of the U.S. House of Representatives from 1975 to 1983. He represented Georgia's 7th Congressional District. Despite being a Democrat, McDonald was a conservative and a staunch opponent of communism. On September 1st, 1983, Larry McDonald was aboard Korean Airlines Flight 007. The plane, a civilian Boeing 747, was en route from New York City to Seoul, South Korea, with 269 passengers and crew on board. All passengers and crew, including Larry McDonald himself, perished in the crash. The circumstances surrounding the downing of Korean Airlines Flight 007 are controversial at best. Others call it a false flag attack. But one thing's for sure. This was the last interview he ever gave.
Mr. McDonald, I'm not a conspirator. I think even Buchanan would vouch for that.
Well, you are.
Robert Welch.
Foreign Relations.
Robert Welch. No, I don't think so. Yeah, I'm a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Is that a conspiracy?
Well, you've certainly. Well,
let me just tell you what Newsweek says. The John Birch Society considers communism only one arm of a master conspiracy in which socialist American insiders are plotting to establish world government. Now, it also says, and here's Director John McManus, that's your public relations director, saying that former Secretary of State Alexander Haig and CIA Director William Casey are two of these master conspirators who are plotting to establish world government. Now, what do you say? That kind of silly, asinine statement is what makes people laugh at the John Birch Society.
Well, Tom, I'm sure being a long-standing member of the Rockefeller apparatus, and as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations of longstanding, you're fully aware that there is an elitist core in this country that has seen value in subsidizing communism, of protecting communism.
It has?
Sure.
You're accusing me of subsidizing communism?
No, I'm saying
because I happen to belong to a...
there is an elite core. Wait a minute. There is an elite core in this country that has dominated American society.
Well, I'm not one of them.
Trilateral Commission.
Council on Foreign Relations.
I suppose.
Well, let's face it, they have dominated the State Department for 40 years, and pretty much openly.
All right, but what are they trying to do?
Well, their objective is to try to bring about a gradual transition in our society, a dissolving of sovereignty, and a moving steadily to the left on the political spectrum.
Well, who are they?
The elitist groups that I mentioned, particularly key individuals and policymakers in the Council on Foreign Relations.
Is the International Monetary Fund part of it?
Well, I would say the International Monetary Fund has certainly been set up for the purpose of facilitating that transfer of sovereignty and transfer of wealth on the road.
We elected Mr. Conservative.
Let me just finish the point, because otherwise we're going to have a lot of unanswered questions. That you are looking at a group that has worked to bring about a dissolution of national sovereignty on the road to world government. And certainly you're familiar with the local professor Carol Quigley, who has been part of your club. in which he admitted all this. And he said in his book, Tragedy and Hope, the only thing I disagree is that we've worked to keep it a secret. And you see Arthur Schlesinger Jr. writing way back in 1947, says, yes, this is the hidden policy of America. But we can't tell the American public because they're too unsophisticated to see the value.
What is the instrumentality of world government? What is the instrumentality?
All the things to say about Arthur Schlesinger. That's the silliest statement I ever heard. He never made anything like that.
Well, let me suggest that you read the May-June issue of the Partisan Review of 1947, Tom, and you can read it for yourself. It's called
Arthur Schlesinger said there was a conspiracy. A conspiracy to promote communism?
No, he didn't use the word conspiracy. He said the objective was to bring about... Let me finish. I'll tell you. He said that the objective, the secret policy, which we can't tell the American public because they're not sophisticated enough to see the value, is that through a steady result of erosion of New Deals, we bring the American society steadily to the left, and through a sound concept of benign containment, we merge into the vital center of the socialist left. Those are his words, not mine.
I think John Kennedy was a member of that conspiracy.
No, let me ask you this. The World Federalist Movement in the post-war era contained a lot of people who eventually broke with it, and a lot of people thought the UN in the post-war era looked toward world government. Sure. Indeed, they did, up until 48, 49. But a lot of them said, look, we were utopian. That's over and done with. We can't move. And a lot of them came in Kennedy's government. Schlesinger was in there when they were fighting in Vietnam, launched the effort in Vietnam. Schlesinger was behind the Bay of Pigs. In other words, look, isn't there some move that occurred in the post-war era that now has been dissipated because nobody believes in the utopian ideal of world government anymore?
Well, I think there are those that realize that moving straight from a prototype of the United Nations into world government perhaps is tactically impossible. But phasing out increasingly national sovereignty into regional government and phasing out sovereignties into international treaties in multiple areas.
The whole movement toward, quote, interdependence.
Yeah.
NATO is part of the conspiracy?
Well, there are certainly elements in NATO. There are people in NATO who are very strongly dedicated to the defense of the West. But at the same time, you find in NATO a steady dissolution. You find a growing weakness. There's a NATO policy dominated by State Department policies that has not worked.
Well, it's a regional grouping, and I think, therefore, it may be suspect by the John Birch Society.
We're talking with Congressman Larry McDonnell, who has recently been elevated, I guess, to chairmanship of the John Birch Society, succeeding Robert Welch. We'll be back in a minute.
Congressman Larry McDonnell, the Democrat from Georgia. Mr. McDonnell, your predecessor believed that the PTA was too left-wing and that the John Birch Society at one time tried to infiltrate it, or so he said. He used the word infiltrate. Is that part of your program now?
Well, I think when the PTA comes out in its program for the test ban treaty, and when the PTA comes out for gun control, it comes out for obviously national legislative programs that have been linked with liberaldom, having nothing to do with education of our children. I think many people are wondering what in the world is the PTA doing, and that includes members of the John Birch Society.
Well, I wonder about you. I wonder about you. I looked you up. You're the biggest joiner that I've ever seen in the world. You belong, as I counted them, to 67 organizations, among which are the National Rifle Association, the American Pistol and Revolver Association, the Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, the Second Amendment Foundation, and the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms.
Well, Tom, I think there's a real drive in this country to try to destroy the realization of our citizens that they have a fundamental constitutional right to keep and bear arms as the Constitution allowed. And unfortunately, there are those in our society, including elements of the PTA nationally, not always locally by any stretch, but nationally, who would believe that the federal government should restrict the right of citizens to keep and bear arms.
Let me ask you about this conspiracy again.
Well, you can take the issue of one of the major problems of this country is inflation and the problems of the destruction of the dollar. And the fact of the matter is, in spite of promises of the contrary, Reagan has not moved to correct the deficiencies. We're now back to Keynesian economics, despite comments to the contrary.
Do you think that's a result of the conspiracy you mentioned? Is there somebody working on them to get the inflation so that this country will be weaker?
Well, as a man who campaigned against elitism, as a man who in his campaign rhetoric said that he would not be having the Council on Foreign Relations trilateral types dominating his cabinet, he's got about 250 members of such in his administration.
Well, let me ask you about Bill Casey. Now, I've known Bill.
250 members. Of the trilateral commission.
I've known Bill Casey
in the administration.
I've known Bill Casey, the director of CIA, since World War II. As a matter of fact, in World War II, he was my boss. Now, your public relations director, the John Birch Society, says that Bill Casey is a part of this conspiracy.
Let's face it, Bill Casey, before he became CIA, one of his big jobs was aiding in the transfer of technology and goods and so forth to the Soviet Union, helping the Kama River Project, the Export-Import Bank, helping to finance these
the
things.
Export-Import Bank part of the conspiracy?
I think the whole drive, that the fact that the American people have been tapped steadily, especially since World War II, to finance their enemies, and to have the massive technology transfer to those who
I agree with you.
You know that from the Braden Doctrine in the agency, which you're very familiar with, and the feeling that we must somehow subsidize the, quote, non-communist left. That's among our so-called allies.
Braden was
and in country after country, that turned out to be the communists, the crypto-communists masquerading.
Yeah, that's Mr. Mitterrand, who was taking the strongest position against the Russians of any Western European.
Well, he was about to lose everything at the polls, and he had to show some sign. It's very difficult to say exactly how far that will be.
Congressman McDonnell, he's been using the term conspiracy.
No, I didn't use it. For heaven's sake, Pat. The John Birch Society used it.
I don't want to go through the tapes.
Well, it is. Don't blame it on me. He used it.
You've used it 45 times.
That's right. They say this is a conspiracy. I want to know what the conspiracy is. I'm trying to find out who's in it and what agencies of government in it, because I want to fight it along with you.
You look like...
Great, Tom. Let me tell you, Tom, as a matter of...
Not a member of the conspiracy. He's a member of the press.
Let me ask you. Mr. Braden's used for the 47th time the term conspiracy. Now, let me ask you seriously. When you use people like Casey, who's on the Council on Foreign Relations, David Rockefeller's Trilateral Commission, what do you mean, or do you mean, is that your term, the term conspiracy?
Well, there are many different levels of the problem. But yes, the term has been used, the term of conspiracy, when you have a group of people...
they're actively collaborating, and at the other end of that point of collaboration are communists, and on this end of the point of collaboration is Bill Casey and trilateralists and CFR.
You have people who are part of the elitist structure of this country that have dominated this country openly for 40 years.
I know, but they're not... Is that a conspiracy?
Now, wait a minute. If people quietly working together for evil objective, two or more, that by definition is a conspiracy. You have, by their own admission, you look at The Tragedy and Hope by Professor Carroll Quigley, who's a member of this elitist group. He says, sure, we've been working this. Sure, we've been collaborating with communism. Yes, we're working for a global accommodation. Yes, we're working for world government. The only thing I object to is that we have kept it a secret. And I think we've gone so far along, we should come out and say,
I'll bet you $1.50 that Bill Casey doesn't know who Professor Quigley is. I don't.
He's at Georgetown a number of years ago.
He died a couple of years ago, and he wrote The Tragedy and Hope. He's a very noted member of your club, Tom.
Tom, you've got to broaden your reading.
That's right.
What I ought to do is read more about conspiracies, and that's why I'm interested in...
Well, I'll tell you what you ought to do is go back and look at your founder, Edward Mandell House, because he wrote the book Philip Drew, Administrator, in India. Colonel House said that what he envisioned for the world was a world government along socialist lines as envisioned by Karl Marx. Now, that's your leader. Now, Tom, so you got to go back to the beginning.
Well, his leader was Woodrow Wilson. Do you think he was a communist?
No, I think Woodrow Wilson was his follower. I think Edward Mandell House dominated Wilson, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm. And so Edward Mandell House, that was we ought to make that clear. He was President Wilson's
alter ego. That's correct.
Yeah. So he is the real villain from which all these conspiracies.
No. He is a major figure. But there has been, unfortunately, in the West, an element. There are good members in the Council on Foreign Relations, dedicated, patriotic people. You've had Sproul Braden, who was a member of the Council of the Birch Society,
Bill Buckley's
and Council on Foreign Relations. You've got some dedicated people. But the driving forces have very clearly been willing to collaborate, subsidize, work for technology transfer for what they feel is some type of an accommodation and merger. And I submit this would be a disaster for the American Republic.
Are there any in Congress?
Sure.
I disagree with Congressman McDonnell as the idea of conspiracy with you and your friends. I think it's more of a herding instinct. The direction you've been moving in, inertia, carries you further and further. But I do think this, that slogan, get the U.S. out of the UN and the UN out of the U.S. looks better and better every day, doesn't it? Maybe they were ahead of their time on that one.
No, Pat, I think we got to have communications with the world, and the UN makes me mad too, but I don't think it's a part of the great conspiracy which extends from Bill Casey and Al Haig all the way to communism.
Well, I think that Larry McDonnell's a patriot. I think he's wrong about the conspiracy, but he's probably less wrong about what he says about this country than the guy I'm talking to.
Probably less than the guy he's talking to. So let's find out who Tom Braden is, because most of you, if you're astute observers of the obvious, that was Pat Buchanan sitting to Larry McDonald's left to your screen right, and on screen left to McDonald's right. That was Tom Braden. Now, Tom Braden is a really interesting character in history. And if you are not familiar and you are a Grand Theft World member, you can get over to the membership and you can get into the history blueprint here. Let's get away from this optimum population trust, because that would have to do with eugenics and population control and global warming and, all those same sort of people. Because Bill Gates, he's interested in both, right? He's got a plan for global warming, right? Battling global climate change. And he's also into the century of the decade of the pandemic and vaccines and all this good stuff, right? But we're not on Bill Gates. We're on Tom Braden. So we're going to go up here to the search box. Again, any of the 10,000 plus thoughts, person, places, things, events substantial to this line of investigation into globalism, Tom Braden, they're accessible through a real easy search right there. There's Tom Braden. Oh, check him out. He wasn't under the CIA. He's one of the guys who created CIA. He's part of the Georgetown set, a group of people that have come up several times tonight. While Bill Donovan groomed him, he later became personal assistant to Alan Dulles. He was in the British Army. He's part of the British infiltration of the United States intelligence community, which, as you see, is a quite comprehensive set of thoughts there. And if you were to learn anything about this, this is the type of thing that someone like Dr. Malone could dig into. He could spend a week just on this thought complex alone. We call it a plex in the brain. It's the personal brain software. Anyone can download it for free. To get my model, all my years of work since 2008, there is a small fee. All right, so membership has its privileges. Tom Braden. He's part of the Special Operations Executive, which is a British group of spies and commandos during World War II, of which Ian Fleming and a whole bunch of other people that were involved in the Anglo-American establishment, Miles Copeland, they were involved in this. There was a creation layer. These are the people that helped to create the Special Operations Executive. These are people who participated in it, like Roald Dahl. You ever hear him? He wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, right? Actually, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, I thought that was Ian Fleming. But they're connected because they're both working in Washington as spies in America, posing as authors in 1938, 1939, when the British installed BSC, and it must be in the part up here, British Security Coordination. Actually, yeah, I would have to just type in BSC. SC. This is part of that infiltration. Oh, sorry. BSC. Doing it live. Part of the infiltration of the establishment. These people are into population control. They're into eugenics. They're into world globalism, world federalism, whatever you want to call it. It's not freedom for everyone on the planet. So there is a plan to take away free will from individuals, and it does have a lot to do with the Council on Foreign Relations that Mr. McDonald, now dearly departed, was opining about, because this is one of the central nodes, and he is somebody who would know, being in charge of the John Birch Society back in the day. So these are some inconvenient facts of the situation. And again, having people of a Dr. Robert Malone aptitude looking into the psychological warfare and they, them, those who are precipitating it down on us, like this equation can go asymptotal. You know what an asymptote is? It's the part where it goes exponential. That's an asymptote, where it goes nearly vertical. Meaning, at some point, everyone on this planet basically gets red-pilled in some single piece of media, according to the chart. That's what an asymptote is, right? So at some point, somebody like Robert Malone or somebody, Tucker, I don't know, there's a forum and people find out. And if we can find out before they find out a technological way to subvert our free will forever, then we can kind of keep living our lives. Otherwise, that's their end game, as spelled out in the First Global Revolution and all their other papers that, are available for public study You know, you guys have access to Amazon and Barnes and Noble and archive.org. If you need free copies, like the free copies are out there. LibGen, what is it? libgen.io. Find any book on the planet and read it. You have no excuse now that you know what's going on. Incredible people are taking large platforms and telling everybody you should not be the last to figure this out, is the point. What do you think, Scott?
I mean, that's fantastic. I didn't know about LibGen. I'm gonna have to write that down. libgen.io, huh? Well, I just thought it was so funny, like hearing those guys kind of go back and forth. It was just like, you know, as you say, just incredulous. They're like, well, that couldn't possibly be true. Like, no. It's like, he was dropping some serious truth bombs, some serious gravy there. He's like, I mean, he was speaking like us. There's nobody probably talking like this back then.
He's been in it for 4 years too.
Yeah, I'm just like, you know, like, man, that guy was way ahead of the curve. They had to take him out. No way.
That's like me saying I like read Wikipedia and PubMed, so I know about mRNA. But like he's on the trail. Like I'm not chastising his nascent nature, because it's remarkable that someone of his stature and position even got to these realizations.
Totally.
Like these are usually reserved for not people in his position. So well done, Robert. Well done. Now, in this
I was more talking about those guys in the clip just now. Like that was like 80s, 90s. He's talking about hope and like dropping.
For sure.
Oh my God. Like 40
but you never
years ago.
saw that shit again, did you?
No.
That guy went away in a very suspicious plane crash. You know, was covered up from on high. So just like, you know, there was Hale Boggs and Nick Begich's dad and those guys that got killed on a plane in Alaska. Nick Begich, he writes about HARP, right? Because his dad was killed in that plane crash. And Hale Boggs was like, it was a Warren Commission, and like they're trying to figure out who killed JFK, and they whacked these guys. And the CIA knew where the plane was crashed, and they did not send the rescue people because they wanted them to die and be eaten alive by wolves and all the other atrocious things that goes on in nature when you can't protect yourself, right? They made that happen. Why? To cover up something that they did that they know was wrong. That's why they won't let it out, because what they did is wrong. They know it's wrong. They know the public would not approve, and that's why they lied to us. So let's not act like we're children in kindergarten. We've all been around for a while, and we understand what these people are up to. We're learning what we're up against.
Everyone's doing some kind of self-help these days, and you can find a million self-help courses out there. Most other courses out there are hosting lectures. They're hosting videos, they're maybe even doing Q&As, and these are great starting points to encourage learning. But at Autonomy, we believe that hands-on practice is the best way to really lock in what we're learning. There's no better way to gain confidence and mastery than through action. After each lecture, we practice the concepts we've learned with other students, giving and receiving feedback in a non-judgmental environment. The result is mastery of concepts like entrepreneurship, ethical sales, and self-reliance in an environment that directly translates to the real world. Plus, you make connections with other like-minded individuals who are learning right alongside you, and you have a lifetime membership in the community. The Autonomy course with Richard Grove equips you with confidence, competence, and courage in a world filled with confusion and noise. You can learn more at getautonomy.info. We'll see you there.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. there's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come